They arrived in clusters, loud, smiling, chaotic. The humans. At first, I thought the noise was some form of alarm, but no. It was laughter. Booming, unguarded, and strangely infectious. I am Khalith of the Zern, a scholar of xenocultural integration, and I have studied over 200 sapient species. Yet none have perplexed me like these. Deathworlders. They come from a planet so hostile that its dominant species evolved not just to survive, but to thrive in conditions most civilizations would deem uninhabitable. Their presence on Galaxis Primaris was part of a new cultural initiative, an experimental exchange program. Naturally, I volunteered to observe. If any species could integrate, it would be these humans. Adaptability is practically encoded in their DNA. What I didn't anticipate was their casual disregard for protocol. Their arrival lacked the decorum typical of interstellar diplomacy. Instead of ambassadorial order, they spilled out like a pack of unruly juveniles, dragging behind them creatures. Not machines. Not assistants. Creatures. A six-legged mammal with excessive fur bounded across the arrival platform, barking in rhythmic staccato. Another student trailed behind a feathered quadruped wearing a harness labeled emotional support. One girl carried what appeared to be a scaled, long-bodied reptile coiled lazily around her shoulders like a sash. It blinked once, tongue flicking, utterly unconcerned with the dozens of stunned species around it. "Are those pets?" asked Counselor Drivex, his mandibles twitching in a display of pure confusion. His own species, the Andalari, do not interact with non-sapient life unless it's bioengineered for utility. The concept of recreational animal companionship was foreign, if not repugnant. "Yes," I answered, uncertain. "I believe that is what they call them. They brought livestock to a diplomatic exchange?" I was about to respond when a human, broad-shouldered, casual, and utterly unaware of the horror his group had unleashed, walked past us. His pet, a small canid with pointed ears and boundless energy, barked again. The human clicked his tongue and the creature sat obediently, tail wagging in rhythmic thumps. "Sorry about Buster," the human said with a grin. "He gets excited when he smells new species." Drivex recoiled half a body length. "It smells us?" I didn't answer. I was too busy observing. These creatures, the pets, were not simply tolerated by the humans. They were loved. Revered even. One young woman knelt to feed her companion from a pouch. It responded by nuzzling her neck, emitting a soft purring noise that made several aquatic species squirm. It was raw emotional intimacy, displayed openly. No species I'd observed offered such a bond with lesser beings. Later, during the orientation session, I watched as the humans seated themselves, each flanked by their companion animal. One brought a miniature bovine with shaggy fur that emitted calming pheromones. Another, oddly, had a creature with no visible sensory organs, yet it seemed to detect emotional shifts in nearby sentience with eerie precision. When one of the Riltac students displayed distress, the animal crawled silently to them and leaned in. The Riltac calmed almost instantly. We had studied humans for decades. We knew of their strength, their chaotic intelligence, their ability to weaponize nearly any substance. But no briefing had prepared us for this. They brought predators, emotional regulators, companions, on leashes and in bags, as if this was normal behavior. And to them it was. Even more perplexing, other species didn't quite know how to respond. The Solari, known for their antiseptic cleanliness, demanded an immediate quarantine. The Vrusk initiated legal proceedings, attempting to classify the pets as contraband biological material. Yet despite protests, the humans defended their companions with conviction that bordered on the spiritual. "These aren't just animals," one human declared when confronted. "They're family." That word again. Family. A concept the Zern hold in clinical regard. Genetically linked units optimized for reproduction and social utility. But for humans it's more nebulous. Chosen. Emotional. Messy. And apparently inclusive of non-sapient life. The faculty debated for hours. Should the humans be forced to quarantine their pets? Should the animals be banned entirely? But the humans refused to separate. They argued politely but firmly that they could not function without their companions, that their well-being depended on it. I noted that none of them raised their voices. None threatened violence. They didn't need to. Their certainty was total. Unyielding. In the end, it was decided they could stay. But only in the human dormitory. Pets were not to enter shared classrooms. The humans agreed, but with a caveat: if a pet was registered as a support entity, it could accompany its owner anywhere. 57 registration forms were filed the same night. I could not sleep. I reviewed the footage a dozen times, noting every interaction, every nuance. These pets were not weapons. Not tools. They were bridges, between species, between emotional states. The humans had brought more than companions. They had brought pieces of their world. Their dangerous, unpredictable, deeply bonded world. They had no idea what was coming. By the time the culture exchange session began, the anticipation had reached a fever pitch among the non-human students. Each species had taken turns preparing exhibits of their pets, under the assumption that these creatures would be harmless, perhaps symbolic or decorative. Nothing dangerous. Certainly nothing predatory. The Solari were first. A tall, elegant aquatic being presented a translucent orb that floated lazily beside her, emitting soft musical chimes. It shimmered when exposed to certain wavelengths of light. The Solari explained that it calmed their nervous system through harmonic resonance. The class responded with polite interest. Next, a Volari drone unit unveiled a small hive fragment. From within, a six-legged crawler emerged, an unassuming symbiote that bonded with its host at birth, regulating stress and temperature. It was silent, efficient, and utterly non-threatening. The Thaxion brought out a static crystalline formation that pulsed faintly with electromagnetic fields. It was a non-sapient sentinel species, incapable of movement but able to detect micro-fractures in the Thaxion's outer structure. A useful geological companion. The Nolaris, composed of gas and light, didn't have pets, but offered a microplasma entity they claimed reflected their thoughts in spark patterns. Most found it cryptic and beautiful. Then the humans entered. There was no fanfare, just the sound of claws clicking against floor tiles and paws shuffling on linoleum. One student led a massive canine through the doorway. Thick coat, alert ears, heavy footfalls. The dog's tongue lolled out in an expression that most species found unnerving. It made direct eye contact with the Solari, who recoiled instinctively. A low, rumbling growl escaped the animal, but the human gave a single-word command and it stopped immediately, sitting with a wagging tail. Another student rolled in a carrier with a cage inside. Within, a sleek bird with piercing eyes tilted its head in abrupt, precise movements. It let out a sharp, guttural cry that caused 3 species to flinch and 1 to involuntarily secrete defensive mucus. A girl with copper hair held a coiled serpent wrapped around her forearm. It moved with chilling grace, tongue flicking. Its scales shimmered with heat signatures in the visible spectrum. A Thaxion whispered in alarm. Reptiles on their world were extinct apex predators, and their presence was taboo. Then came the cat. Small, agile, unbothered. It slipped from its carrier and sauntered onto the presentation platform without a glance at anyone. When an inquisitive drone buzzed too close, the cat leapt, batted it out of the air, and calmly returned to grooming itself. The room fell silent. The creature had asserted dominance over technology without hesitation. And finally, the ferret. It did not enter. It escaped. A blur of fur shot from the confines of a backpack and vanished into the nearest ventilation shaft before anyone could react. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. The human who had brought it muttered an apology that sounded far too casual. "He does that sometimes. He'll be back." The Thaxion instructor turned sharply. "That creature is loose in the facility?" "He's fine. He doesn't bite. Usually." Chaos broke out quickly. The Solari shrieked when the falcon took flight and circled the dome once, wings slicing through the air like razors. The Volari collectively retreated into their hive armor, their drones pulsing emergency colors. The Thaxion doubled their EM shielding. Several Nolaris simply dissipated into the vents, unwilling to share a room with a hunting species. Drivex, the Andalari counselor, demanded immediate containment protocols. He gestured wildly with all 6 limbs. These are wild animals. What kind of civilization allows predators into an academic forum? The humans didn't flinch. They stood calmly as their companions obeyed their commands. The dog lay flat on the floor with its head between its paws. The falcon returned to its perch. The snake stayed coiled and motionless. The cat, still aloof, sat atop the podium. The only chaos remained the ferret, which had somehow returned and was chewing on a Thaxian data crystal with disturbing focus. Pets? Drivex hissed. You said you were bringing pets. A human smiled. These are our pets. You live with these? We raise them. Train them. Love them. Some of them even saved lives. The room was silent. Khalith realized then that the misunderstanding was not accidental. It was cultural. Species like the Solari and Thaxian viewed safety as sacred. To coexist with danger was an aberration. But to humans, it was second nature. They had not tamed nature by eradicating it. They had befriended it. Harnessed it. Turned teeth and claws into loyalty and service. The horror came not from the animals, but from what they represented, a species that made predators into partners. Professor Khalith called for a closed session the next morning. The atmosphere was tense but quiet. None of the humans had withdrawn their companions despite the reaction from the day before. Instead, they returned to class calm, collected, with their animals subdued and close at hand. The other species kept a cautious distance, whispering among themselves. Khalith began interviews immediately, determined to extract some logic from the chaos. The first subject was Aaron, the young man with the large dog. The canine sat beside him, panting softly. What purpose does this creature serve? Khalith asked. Companion, protector, teammate, Aaron said. His name's Rook. He's a German shepherd. They're trained for police work, search and rescue therapy. He can detect fire, explosives, even emotional stress. Why risk living with something capable of violence? He's capable. Not inclined. Big difference. Khalith made note of the distinction. When pressed, Aaron told the story. 2 years ago, during a quake in the Andes, Rook located 3 trapped hikers before drones could triangulate their positions. Pulled one free with his teeth. The dog hadn't received a reward. He had simply wagged his tail and waited for another command. Khalith moved on. The girl with the falcon introduced herself as Laura. She explained falconry in simple terms: trust built over time, flight drills, reward patterns. Her bird was not a servant. It was a partner. She mentioned mutual dependency, how she had once been lost in a desert biome simulation, and the falcon had located the exit by spotting reflective panels from high altitude. Why a falcon, specifically? Khalith asked. I respect them. They're independent. Powerful. They choose cooperation. That means more than forced obedience. Again, that word, choice. Not control. The snake belonged to a quiet student named Rami. He was not particularly expressive, but when speaking about the snake, named Idris, his tone changed. Softer. Warmer. He described how he'd raised Idris from a hatchling, and how the snake responded to his voice, body temperature, and mood. He spoke of stillness and calm, of trust without noise or words. Khalith asked if it had ever harmed him. Never. Not once. But your species fears them. Yes. That's part of why I keep him. I used to fear him, too. Khalith blinked slowly. You made peace with your fear by living with it? Exactly. That idea unsettled him more than anything else so far. Not the fangs or talons, but the calm logic of choosing to coexist with danger. Rami's bond with the snake wasn't accidental. It was philosophical. The cat, predictably, belonged to no one. Or rather, everyone. It had migrated from human to human since arrival. Each seemed to accept its aloof nature, unfazed when it wandered off or ignored commands. one student said. She's like a roommate with claws. You learn to respect her space. Khalith asked what function she served. She comforts us, one replied. She's quiet, smart, judges us a little. She makes us feel at home. And the ferret? He asked warily. Its owner, a lanky youth named Jay, only grinned. Honestly? Chaos. He's a thief, a menace, and the best little monster I've ever known. He also once helped me get out of a locked storage room by dragging my comm device through a vent. You celebrate disobedience? We celebrate unpredictability. Ferrets aren't robots. Neither are we. Each interview returned to the same ideas: trust, coexistence, mutual benefit, emotional grounding. Not once did the humans describe their animals as property or assets. They spoke in terms of affection, history, and mutual respect. Every bond was personal. Khalith processed the data. He compared it to other species. Among the Solari, emotional regulation was chemical. The faction used passive monitoring drones. The Valari had no concept of pets at all. Their swarm instincts fulfilled all emotional roles. None formed bonds with lesser life. They saw it as inefficient, sometimes unethical. Yet the humans had not only formed those bonds, they relied on them. Psychologically, strategically, socially. The presence of animals among them wasn't decorative. It was integral. Khalith closed the session with one final question to the group. Why do you risk emotional attachment to creatures with no speech, no sapience? A girl with soft eyes and a bandaged arm answered. Because they feel. That's enough. Some of them have saved more lives than we ever will. And they don't need language to say, I'm with you. Khalith ended the session in silence. He no longer saw beasts. He saw reflections. Council directives came swiftly after the cultural session. Several species submitted formal concerns. The faction demanded biometric scans of all animal companions. The Valari proposed biocontainment fields. The Andalari outright called for removal. Their representatives argued that allowing predatory, unlicensed lifeforms in an academic compound posed unacceptable biological and psychological risk. Official channels used diplomatic terms. Containment review. Policy reconsideration, but it was clear, they wanted the pets gone. The humans responded with evidence. Aaron submitted incident reports and video documentation of Rook assisting in post-disaster search efforts. Laura uploaded telemetry data from simulated wilderness trials where her Falcon outperformed 3 surveillance drones. Jay showed security footage of his ferret locating a coolant leak in a systems duct by pure curiosity. Rami provided medical testimony. Idris had alerted him to a seizure onset by sensing temperature shifts, likely saving his life. The cat's contributions were less tangible, but students in her proximity showed marked decreases in cortisol levels. Quantitative metrics weren't enough. So they submitted psychological logs, mood stabilization graphs, improved academic performance, better group cohesion. Patterns emerged. Emotional support animals boosted not only individual well-being but team dynamics. In survival training simulations, humans with companions outperformed isolated candidates in both cooperation and adaptability. This reframed the issue. The pets weren't distractions. They were augmentations. Still, the council hesitated. The Andalari remained the loudest voice against the humans. DriveX insisted that any creature incapable of rational consent posed an ethical liability. When that argument faltered, he pivoted. If the animals could not be held accountable, humans must take full legal responsibility for their actions. Unconditional liability. Total accountability. The humans agreed instantly. That shook everyone. No deliberation. No counterterms. Just a firm, unified yes. Khalith observed the exchange closely. This wasn't about pets anymore. It was about identity. The humans weren't defending their animals. They were defending their right to define family on their terms. Their culture didn't separate utility from empathy. To them, coexistence with danger was neither irrational nor reckless. It was foundational. Then came the emergency. A containment breach occurred in Wing D, a malfunction in a RILTAC nutrient stabilizer. The compound flooded with volatile gas. Most beings couldn't survive even minimal exposure. Alarms blared. Standard protocol required immediate evacuation and full drone sweep. But the corridor was blocked, and 3 students were trapped inside. Drones estimated 6 minutes to breach safely. The humans moved in under 4. Aaron, mask secured, ordered Rook forward. The dog located the trapped RILTAC by scent, then guided them back along the wall to avoid the densest gas pockets. Jay's ferret darted into a side duct and chewed through a release valve that neutralized part of the compound's pressure. The Falcon flew through a shattered pane to signal to evac teams that the route was now open. When one of the RILTAC collapsed from shock, Laura pressed her bird's body close to his chest, its warmth and pressure regulating the alien's respiratory function just enough to keep him conscious. All 3 survived. Medical teams arrived to find the humans covered in soot, breath heavy, eyes red, but alive. Their animals were uninjured, calm, waiting. Rook licked the face of the RILTAC as they regained consciousness. The ferret had curled up in Jay's coat pocket. The Falcon preened without stress. Not one human had hesitated. Not one had disobeyed evacuation orders for glory or arrogance. They had done it because someone needed help, and they had partners that made them capable of more. Afterward, there were no more debates. The Council withdrew all objections. Regulations were amended. Companion species brought by humans were to be registered as part of their operational unit. Khalith documented the ruling personally, annotating it in over 30 cultural languages. What began as a bureaucratic dilemma ended as cultural revelation. The humans hadn't brought animals to provoke or boast. They brought pieces of themselves, empathy made manifest in fur, feather, and fawn. And when the crisis struck, those pieces acted without hesitation. Not tools. Not pets. Extensions of purpose. 2 weeks passed. The academy settled. No further objections were raised. Companion species were no longer treated as novelties or threats. Instead, they were quietly integrated. Registration tags were issued. Bioreaders calibrated. Guidelines rewritten. But none of that changed the perception that had already shifted beneath the surface. Khalith began receiving requests from across the quadrant, research queries, cultural exchange proposals, even joint training simulations centered around human-animal symbiosis. The term itself entered diplomatic vocabulary. Symbiotic sentience proxy. A phrase crafted to make bureaucrats comfortable. But the truth was simpler. The humans trusted their companions as they trusted each other. It wasn't idealism. It was tradition. History. Evolution. On their world, survival had never been a solitary endeavor. From wolves to watchdogs, from wildcats to lap companions, from hunting birds to message carriers, every creature at their side carried generations of shared purpose. Not bred into servitude, but aligned over time. Adaptation by alliance. The Council's private review board published a summary. It described human-animal cohabitation as a controlled risk with disproportionate psychological and tactical value. Cold language. But Khalith didn't correct it. He simply filed his own commentary beneath it, a single sentence, *, some species mastered fire. Others mastered steel. The humans mastered loyalty, *. Outside of regulations and reports, the changes were quiet. Faction engineers, once terrified of the snake, now asked Rami how it detected pressure changes before their instruments. A Solari student requested to pet the dog after learning it had located survivors in real disasters. Even the Valari, collective-minded and cautious, observed the cat's movements and noted her disregard for hierarchy with something like admiration. One day, during a rest period, Khalith sat beside a group of students in the Sun Bay. No lectures. No tension. The ferret was curled asleep inside a half-unzipped boot. The falcon perched near a window, watching shadows stretch across the dome. Rook lay with his head on Aaron's leg. The snake, resting still, flicked its tongue briefly at Khalith, who resisted flinching. He broke the silence. "You could have left them behind. Why bring them here, knowing the risk? Aaron shrugged. Because it's who we are, Laura added. Every world talks about peace. But most mean control. Our kind learned peace through danger. Not denial. Understanding. Khalith considered that. It explained much. The lack of fear in their eyes. The ease with which they responded to threats, not with bravado, but with practiced calm. Their companions weren't anomalies. They were anchors. When he reported back to the Interstellar Council, he made his conclusion clear. The animals were not dangerous. They were not unstable. The danger lay in misunderstanding what they represented. The humans did not see the universe in terms of dominance. They saw it as a challenge to be met with cooperation. Tooth and claw didn't frighten them. They'd grown beside it. Survived with it. It had taught them loyalty, patience, instinct, forgiveness. Lessons older than any data archive. More surprising, however, was the effect on others. In the following months, non-human students began requesting approval for creature partnerships of their own. Not copies of human pets, no one tried to replicate their species. But inspired by the bond. A Solari bonded with a low-frequency echo squid that responded to emotional resonance. A Thaxian nurtured a crystalline larva that reacted to ambient stress fields. A Valari queen linked herself to a singular, autonomous drone. Not hiveborn. Chosen. Khalith watched as the Academy, once divided by fear, began to bend toward connection. Not because they all became human, but because humanity had revealed something forgotten. Not every companion needed a voice. Not every ally needed reason. Sometimes, what made you strong wasn't your armor or intellect, but what followed you quietly, trusted you completely, and stood between you and the void without hesitation. And when that truth was witnessed, raw, undeniable, no translation was needed. Just understanding. And a shared silence.